let's just go ahead and start moving this way. We're going to go up the hill behind the house for this foray. A mature puffball found right here. I saw some others over there, probably of the same species. And I'm not noticing a clear basal connection point. It may have broken off here where it was connected to its mycelium that it arose from. But it may be a Bovista species, the tumbling puffballs, which instead of having a little hole at the top that opens up, they kind of split open and fall apart. Many of the puffballs have what's called an ostiole, this little mouth or slit or pore at the top that the spores are released from. So if we watch this and watch it carefully, it is raining but not super hard. We may be able to see some spores coming off when the raindrop lands on the tissue. So puffballs are some of the mushrooms that are typically classified as gasteroid, meaning that they are stomach-like because they produce their spores in their stomachs. Wait a second. Spores in the stomachs? That doesn't make sense.
They have stomachs?
I think they should be called uteroid fungi instead of gasteroid fungi. It's a better metaphor for relating it to the human body. So instead of having a fertile layer on the bottom like most mushrooms where the spores are forcibly released by a tiny water droplet mechanism, as we find in most mushrooms, these have evolved to be more resilient to extreme temperature and humidity fluctuations, and live a more ecosexual lifestyle where they depend on external ecological forces to help them to sporulate, help them to disperse their gametes, their spores, and reproduce. So inside we have this mass, what's called a gleba, of undifferentiated spores and spore-producing cells called basidia. And when it's fresh, most puffballs are pure white inside, and any puffball that is pure solid white inside is edible. Some are better than others. Once they start to turn colors, usually they go through yellow to green and eventually to a dark brown color. They are not edible. They can be a bit toxic, just like causing stomach upsets, indigestion, and they don't taste so good anymore. And at this stage, it's like foam rubber filled with dust kind of texture. Not something you want to eat anyway. In this stage, it's hydrophobic, so when a raindrop falls on it, it punches it and sends up a small cloud of spores. And that's one of the main dispersal mechanisms. Also, you know, when kicked or stepped on or thrown at a friend by a human child or a childish human, we can also assist in the dispersal of the spores that way. The puffballs in the mature state have been used by many traditional and indigenous peoples from around the world as a styptic, as a way to stop blood flow from a wound. And they've also been used for smoking bees to calm them for the honey harvest and other bee tending work, and are still sometimes used that way by some beekeepers. And they're not the only fungi used that way by beekeepers as well.
Is this in the fresh state?
In the mature state like this. So I'll pass that around. You can puff it a little bit. Try not to directly breathe the cloud of spores or get it in your eyes. But it's not too dangerous anyway.
Willoughby, what's the chemical function that will help in this
You know, I don't know much about the chemistry of that.
There's other types of mushrooms people use in that way as well?
Yeah. I think as far as its styptic properties, it probably has more to do with its physical properties than its chemical properties. And it also has significance in a number of First Nations or North American indigenous traditions as charms, also as medicine as styptics, sometimes as an eye wash, and sometimes they're worn like as charms on necklaces and things. And I've noticed like there's where I live in Vancouver. If you drive east about an hour, you cross a road called Popcom Road, I think it's called. And I learned from a local mycologist that that's actually a First Nations name for puffball from that area. And so the place is named after the mushrooms that grow there. It's a grassy area, kind of low-lying near a river. So these often like grassy areas, especially the bovistas. And you can, play games with them, things like that. They make a fun ball to use. All right, friend, turkey tail, Jalebis versicolor. Jalebis meaning thin one, versicolor referring to its versatile colorations. The caps are colored with concentric rings, concentric zones of different colors, and also different textures. If you look up close with the hand lens, you'll see some of these zones are a bit more tufty and hairy than others. My dental floss are missing. Put that in. So you can look at the top and see the tomentose or hairy texture, and you can look at the bottom and see that there's small round pores. And if you'll watch me using my lens, you'll see that I'm getting very close to my eye and very close to the mushroom to get it in focus. And I'm also holding it up so the light from the sun gets in. I'm not shading it like this. And if you have a hat, you may want to tip it back a little to use the lens. So the pores are round to roundish. That's a variable trait, but they're not super maze-like, they're not toothy, and it's not smooth. There's a lot of mushrooms that look a lot like turkey tail, none of which are dangerous or harmful, many of which are also medicinal, but not as potently or as well known as turkey tail.
So what would be like a main characteristic to look for, like to different, the tails, turkey tails, and like...
Yeah, so the pore surface, much closer, much like less than a centimeter. Get it up in there, right there, really close. Think about how big that lens is. The focal point is going to be like about smaller than the diameter of the lens, or about the same. So the white to cream colored pore surface, I've also seen slightly grayish pore surface on turkey tails. The roundness or somewhat roundness of the pores not being maze-like, gill-like, or toothy. It's a pretty even surface. And there's the Sterium mushrooms, which hopefully we'll see. I've seen some today, but back there a ways, that have a smooth undersurface, and they're a bit thinner overall. And that's what's sometimes called false turkey tail or parchment fungus. And there are many species of Sterium, and they're kind of hard to figure out. So I generally just lump them all together as Sterium. Turkey tail, as many of you probably know, has a lot of medicinal properties, immune modulating properties, anti-tumor properties, and many more. Specific activity against breast cancer, prostate cancer, and others. And it's one of the best studied and longest history of use medicinal mushrooms in the world. And it's easily cultivated. Over at Mush Love Table, they've got some beautiful live fruiting bodies emerging from the substrate. Yeah, it's a good one. What's that?
What's your favorite varieties of turkey tail that you think for medicinal properties?
Oh, I couldn't really speak to that.
I feel
No.
like they're all, like, generally speaking, in
The ones that are around. Yeah. 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 There are a lot of closely related species that can look very similar. Trametes pubescens, Trametes hirsuta is a bit thicker and less overlapping shelves, but usually more singular, larger, leathery brackets. And then there's one that used to be in a different genus, Lenzites betulina, the gilled polypore, which has actually been found to be much more closely related to turkey tail, and now it's called Trametes betulina, but it has gills instead of pores. They're quite closely related. So let's move on up. Fresher and not so fresh turkey tails, they are annual. They last a number of months. These fruiting bodies, they grow kind of slowly. They're white around the growing edge. When they're actively growing, there's a white edge to it. And you can also see here these zones that have a little dark green cup fungus on it. Could I have a lens, please? Oh, maybe it's not a cup. Well, I don't know what that is, but it's cool. Anybody who's interested in the tiny fungi could hop in on there. I don't know. It's these green bumps that at a distance look cuppy, but now I'm not sure they are. You'll notice also between these two, which may have been of the same log, this one's got a lot of fruiting bodies on it of the turkey tail, and it's also covered in bark. This one has very little bark and far fewer mushrooms. The bark provides an excellent platform for the creation of primordia, the baby mushrooms. It's a very texturally dense, diverse kind of it's got a lot of relief, and so it provides humid, sheltered microclimates for the development of primordia. In and around human habitation, human influenced, human disturbed zones, we have definitely evolved together, and there are some fungi which are rarely found far from human disturbance. So very urban places and other human inhabited and influenced zones are great places to look for fungi. And so is the forest. There's lots of poison ivy on either side of this trail, so just be aware. If you don't know poison ivy, just don't touch any plant. If anybody wants to speak up at all, feel free to do so also, about whatever. Hey! Woohoo! Oh.
Yeah, right over here is the
okay. Oh, wow, whoa, right there. Yeah. So, I must say, to meet this cool mushroom, I'm a little, let's just say I'm blushing. And so is this mushroom. This mushroom is called the blusher, Amanita rubescens. It's got the universal veil remnants or warts on the cap, reminiscent of Amanita muscaria, Amanita pantherina, and many of the other very classic, characteristic looking Amanitas. The margin of the cap is often a bit striate. You can see the lines where the gills are through the top of the cap around the edge. And you'll see, especially here at the base of the stalk and also where the slugs have munched, there's a red staining and oxidation that happens when the flesh is damaged or exposed to the air. And there's remnants here of a partial veil, the ring around the stalk that is skirt-like in this species. And this is a species that I've only encountered a handful of times because it's not common in my part of the world, but I've seen it in Scotland and in Quebec and New Brunswick and here. So that's like 4 places. It starts out within its universal veil in an egg form, which then as the stalk elongates and the cap expands, it breaks out of the egg, and that egg shell or the universal veil becomes these spots on the cap and also the vulva at the base of the stalk, which is anybody familiar enough with this species to characterize the type of vulva that it has? What type of vulva the blusher has?
I don't know if I know the technical name for it. So.
Okay, is it like maybe collared or scaly or cup-like? We might need a younger specimen. Oh, this one got kind of stepped on. Here's rubescens. R-U-B, like rubus, the plant genus, which refers to the color red. Essence means becoming. So becoming red, it blushes, it stains red. Here's a young one I'll pass around. The universal veil is just breaking up into warts or scales on the cap. The stalk is kind of hollow and stuffed with a pith. It's a fairly dense mushroom at this young stage. Smell it. It smells earthy and pleasant. This is one of the edible species of Amanitas. As many of you probably know, Amanita, the genus, contains the most poisonous mushrooms in the world, the death cap, the destroying angels, and many other poisonous species, some of which are deadly, some of which are not. This particular species is apparently a choice edible. I've never eaten it. Has anybody here ever eaten it?
So rubescens, I call it rubescens as well. Rubescens only occurs in Europe. It's equivalent to calling the people here, the natives here, Indians, because that's what Europeans call people from another place at one time. We haven't caught up with that yet. Rod Tullis, who in New Jersey, has been doing a lot of work, and there's a lot of different names we're placing on these. So there's a lot of people trying these, tasting them, saying they're edible, but we aren't sure what they're eating because this isn't just one species. There's a lot of things that we want to look closely at and just be very careful on our notes so that if something happens, people can look at our notes and say, great, we won't make that mistake again. But just to throw that in. But yeah, I would call it rubescens as well, so it's not a disagreement.
So this is somehow also Amanita rubescens, but somehow not. Looks weird, right? This one, and this one's like halfway there. This one is pretty fully on its way to being hijacked by another fungus. Who's familiar with the lobster mushroom? Or the bolete eater, Hypomyces chrysospermum? This one is Hypomyces hyalinus, correct?
Yeah.
And this one, it's an ascomycete that is in the pyrenomycetes, like Zach was talking about, those black crusts that Carver was super interested in. Also, cordyceps are pyrenomycetes, meaning that they're spore-producing cells. The acini are produced in flask-shaped little perithecia, they're called. Little pimples, if you will. This one hasn't gotten to that stage. Many of them also have asexual kinetiospore stages. And this one hijacks the fruiting bodies of this particular Amanita species and perhaps some other Amanita species, but definitely this one. I think every time I've seen Amanita rubescens, I've also seen some that were infected with this Hypomyces hyalinus. And it makes them into very grotesque phallic forms, which I find curiously beautiful.
Is it still edible?
I don't think so. Do you know? Anybody?
So I know Ursula Hoffman. She recently died. She knew she knew somebody. She was in her 80s. She knew somebody who ate these all the time and said they were delicious. But she told me this person was completely out of their minds. I don't know what happened to that person, or if what happened. So you'll always find instances of people who eat something. Just because somebody eats something, the estimated lethal LD50, the lethal dose for 50% of the population for death caps, is 6 caps.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
According to Dennis Benjamin's book, Mushrooms, Poisons, and Panaceas, which came out a number of years ago, you could eat 5 and you'll still be under the lethal dose. So poisons is something we have, there's a huge discoveries we're making. Orlinine poisoning from Cortinarius was only recently discovered, as in a few decades ago. It takes 2 days to have initial symptoms. So initial symptoms, you won't feel anything. The general rule with poisons is if you get sick under 4 hours and you only eat one species of mushroom and you cooked it, then you're probably not going to die. If it takes more than 4 hours, get to a hospital pretty quick. Yeah. But yeah, poisons are something I know very little about. There's always people eating poisons. I'm very careful.
Yeah.
I don't play with Amanitas. It's just not worth it. There's so many better things to eat. Raspberries, for instance.
I personally, I really appreciate and respect that approach. And personally, for me, I really enjoy eating the edible Amanitas. I've never tried this species. Usually, when I find them, they're in pretty bad shape, or I've just wanted to play it on the safe side and see them many times before I try eating them, get familiar with it, eat them with somebody who's eaten them before, things like that. But I very much enjoy the edible Amanita species that I have eaten. They're great. But if you're not well versed in detailed identification, don't try eating Amanitas. Yeah, so this one, see it before you eat it. See it many times. Get to know it really well. Scotty, would you carry this one back?
Yes.
I want that one to hang out tonight during Sex, Life, and Mushrooms. Here's something really cool that I do not know. So check these out on your way up. If you're inclined to get down on your hands and knees and take a good look, you can do so. Maybe we want to collect a couple of these beautiful bugs. I read about you. I've heard you're delicious. Small. So, Zach, do you want to talk about it since you know it?
So, Gyroporus castaneus, chestnut bolete, refers to the chestnut color on the top of the cap. Yeah, there are these little nutty edible mushrooms. They're pretty good. I haven't eaten them a lot. They tend to be small, and you find a few, so I kind of only look for booms of fungi. But if you're really into food or like these, they can be they're worthwhile, and you'll find big glades where you'll find a whole lot of them all at once. So, but they have a nice smell. So something we'll do is sometimes we'll take a little taste of like a piece of the cap, just kind of chew it. They have a bit of a nutty taste. Chew it a bit, spit it out. Unlike plants, fungi are pretty safe to touch, to even taste. Spit out afterwards, and then many fungi are poisonous raw. Shiitakes, for instance, will cause a dermatitis reaction even raw.
In some people, maybe 25%
yeah.
of the population.
And chicken mushroom has an allergic reaction, good percent.
So let's pick a couple of these. One will keep whole, and the other one people can break off a small piece with their fingers instead of biting it directly, and have a taste. And I believe these grow in mycorrhizal association with oaks and chestnuts, is that correct? Typically?
Chestnut is not actually, chestnut used to be very common here. It used to be 1 in 4 trees is the estimate. It's been taken out by a fungus brought by the Asian chestnut. I feel like, I want to say I see them with oaks, which is strange because I don't see oaks here. But yeah, I know them as an oak inhabitor.
Yeah, that's what I've read.
Yep.
That's yummy.
Yeah. This rubescens has a slug in the Aryan genus as well, and what's really neat with the Aryan genus of slugs, for me, is the front of the slug is called the mantle. And that's where like a lot of their organs are, particularly their genitals for reproduction are on the left side of their head. And on rainy days, they'll come up and they make this beautiful scene where they curl up and the white genital organs, they're hermaphrodites. They all just swirl together, so it's this nice symmetry. But on the right side is their breathing hole. So when they aren't reproducing, you can always look at the right side of their mantle, and it opens up and it closes, and it opens up and closes. So if you've never seen that before, it's a pretty intimate thing for me, so recommended. But they're frequent on fungi. And you can see Aryan bites on the bottom as well.
All over it. Your step as you're moving through the duff here, there's a lot of what we call mush rumps. Small mushrooms that are not mature yet, that have not quite yet come out. They're emerging from underneath the organic layer, the duff layer. Oh, these are the salt shaker type puffballs. Are they? I think so, yeah. Unless it's been eaten on by be sliced in half vertically to make sure they're not an Amanita egg.
Yeah, so like this looks like, it looks round and whitish. Right. Open it up and you will see that kind of gill layer. So
we got a little brown mushroom fruiting on a stick here.
That's actually a really good
And you'll notice that, I'm not sure if it's the mycelium of this particular mushroom, but some kind of mycelium is holding together all these pine needles and maple and oak leaves. I guess they're just oak leaves. There is oak here.
There is, I know.
Yeah, so does anybody know the definition of a tree? It's that appendage that grows off the edge of a mushroom.
Yeah.
And that's actually a real thing because the theory is that the current understanding is before plants came on land, fungi came on land first. Water was very stable. So, you know, fungi paved the way, so to speak, for plant life and then animal life to occur on land. So just a little interesting thing. Keep that definition of trees in mind.
Russula's over here. Russula is a very important genus. Very diverse and very common. Very prominent in forests. They're mycorrhizal with a wide variety of tree types, speaking generally of the genus. And they're generally quite difficult to identify to species, but quite easy to identify to genus in most cases. So I'm going to take this one here so we can all see and feel and perhaps taste. And I know very little about the species of Russula in eastern North America in particular. But as I said, they're hard to ID to species anyway, so I often kind of think of them as groups based on their form and their taste and edibility and things like that. Some Russulas are edible and others are not, but it also depends who you ask. In northern and eastern Europe, many Russulas are eaten by people who will salt them, basically packing them in rock salt and allowing them to slowly lacto-ferment or something like that, and then eat them. Even a lot of ones that many people would not consider edible are eaten by this way by some people. Edibility is really a subjective and personal and cultural thing. And a lot of people kind of have a disdain for the quality of Russulas in terms of their edibility, but I find that the edible species that I eat are very delicious. One of the things about Russulas is, generally speaking, the ones that are edible have a mild and slightly sweet taste, and the ones that are not edible, which cause digestive upsets, have a spicy, acrid, burning taste. So you could break off a small piece of the cap and gill and chew on it, but you have to let it stay in your mouth for a while, because the enzymes in our saliva activate these spicy chemicals. You won't taste it right away. It can take up to 30 seconds for these flavors to develop. So just kind of like when you take a sip of wine, you taste different things at the beginning than at the end, then after, the aftertaste, it's all different. Russulas are very much that way. This one's tasting mild. It's quite mealy. And I'm not going to do it just for the sake of passing this around whole, but Russulas have spherical cells, which is rare in mushrooms, and that causes them to be brittle and chalky and break apart cleanly. They're not fibrous like most mushrooms. Crucial players. Food for many. Slugs, bugs, deer, rodents, birds. Many animals eat Russulas.
Yeah, just a couple minute species we're passing too. On many of the pine needles, there's these little spots on the eastern white pine needles. A lot of those are going to be Lopodermium pinestre.
Cool.
Just teeny little things that tend to get missed. We're also passing a lot of the conifer branches, and there's this stuff that looks like a Trametes witch's butter. It's not, it's a Dacromyces.
You mean tremella. You said Trametes.
Oh yeah, tremella, pardon me. Yeah, so Dacromyces, maybe Palmatis, but there's a few more. We also have a slime mold, Ceratiomyxa reticulosa.
Yeah.
Is what I'm identifying it as.
How do you see the slime mold, or how do you know?
Under a hand lens is the best way. It'll look like all these little white strands coming up, and it's just to acknowledge those beings before we pass them.
Thank you.
A lot of these, like many mushrooms, don't have any known human use. They defy human economies or destruction, but many of them may be quite important. It'll be hard to know.
Yeah, they're important for themselves and for the other beings in their direct world.
Yeah, this stuff.
Many slime molds eat bacteria. Wow, I smell chanterelles.
Yeah, I do as well.
There are some up here. I mean,
I smell them. Does anybody else smell that?
I do, yeah.
Smell the air. What's it smell like?
Hippies.
This is great with all the rain.
Maybe we'll find some.
Like you know this guy does.
So this is another earth ball or scleroderma.
There's some really good hypomycetized blushers over here looking super weird. And here's another slime mold. I'm not much for identifying slime molds, but I am much for appreciating their beauty. Wow, it's so cool. Yeah, super cool.
Right, so right now it's in Protus, which is the dumping ground kingdom. If you don't know where it goes, you put it in Protus. It started as animal, and then it went to plant, and then it went to fungi, and now it's in Protus. So it's traditionally studied by mycologists, slime molds, but they're technically Protus now by the current consensus. They might change it back at some point, or they might put it in somewhere else entirely. So.
Is it known how the cells communicate with each other to use the unit?
It is. I don't know if I can explain it right now. There have been some tests and experiments. They're used a lot right now in like bioengineering because they're that organism that can solve mazes and do things that are very hard for computers to do. Except their motivation is oatmeal. So if they could make a map and put oatmeal where they want to go, the slime mold can figure out without using any computer algorithms effectively. Yeah, without any nervous system, just a single cell that has this. I don't know if you can call it intelligence, but it has something that can figure things out.
Single cellular? To look at it, it looks like multicellular.
It is single cellular. As it's changing there, it's starting to break up and make its reproductive parts. So those are becoming haploid cells. It's creating those. But yeah, when it's the plasmodium, it's one cell. If you see a scrambled egg slime, that's one cell.
Literally one cell.
With multinuclei.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got a couple other mushrooms here that are heavily eaten by slugs. One looks to be the remnants of an Amanita species, but maybe not the blusher, although there is a little bit of reddening, but it's very yellow cap. Can't really say what, but we've got a little bolete as well. Perhaps a Xerocomus or Boletus. Again, hard to say, it's very slug bitten, but beautiful red around the margin and a faint blue staining on the pores. You can see that. And note the sticky, slightly viscid cap of the Amanita. We pay a lot of attention to the textures of all the different parts of the surfaces of the mushroom. And there's a lot of terminology that can be very technical and based in Latin and Greek. And then there's usually less specific, less detailed, common like English language terms that could be used instead. So we could say sticky, slimy, slippery, or we could say subviscid, perhaps. This bolete has a dry cap. So we'll just check those things out. You can also notice the membranous skirt-like partial veil on the Amanita.
Willoughby, how about this?
Oh! Nice! Jelly babies.
Sweet truth.
Leosha, maybe lubrica or viscosa, I don't know. This one's got a little greenishness to it.
They get an algae that grows in
okay.
here, so
Covered in algae. Leosha lubrica. I think it would be a great porno name. These are ascomycetes, and they're fairly gelatinous. They look a lot like a typical cap and stalk mushroom, but the spore-producing cells are on the top rather than on the underside. There are no gills or pores, and apparently they're edible. I have never eaten them, but I have a couple of friends who say they're delicious.
What's the common name?
Jelly babies.
Jelly babies?
Yeah. And out west, when we're picking yellowfoot chanterelles and belly button hedgehogs in the winter time. These are often up in the same zones at the same time and kind of look similar and have been known to slip into people's baskets unexpectedly when they're collecting those mushrooms. And so anyway, very cute. They smell good. Very cute. Touch them, look at them, love them. Leosha. And that one should definitely go in somebody's collection container.
Have that furry surface.
And this one's, and these are smaller than biform tends to be. I'm gonna call this Trichaptum abiatinum. Really common around here is Trichaptum biform or biforme, which mostly grows on hardwoods, although Zach says they've also been found on conifers. But this is a sister species. The Trichaptums look vaguely like turkey tails. They're a leathery shelving bracket in overlapping shelves, sometimes partially resupinate on the underside of the log or branch. This young growth here on the top hasn't fully developed yet, and it's very purplish. And you'll see hints of purple on these other ones. The common name is violet tooth polypore. And it's quite lovely. And if you look up close with the lens, I'm not sure where it is, maybe it's back in my pocket, maybe it's floating around somewhere, you'll see that it's got its fertile undersurface, its hymenium is, or hymenophore is somewhere between pores and teeth. I think of the fertile undersurface, different types of forms, as more of a spectrum than than categorically. So there's pores, there's teeth, there's gills, there's maze-like hymenophores or fertile undersurfaces, but there's all these in-betweens, all those different forms, and that can vary within a single species or even within a single fruiting. You can see different forms.
Got a little albion over here.
Okay, maybe we'll move on. Little brown mushrooms. They can be a lot of work. Mycelium that probably has a bit of a decay column through the wood. Fungi, wood-rotting fungi tend to grow along the vasculature within the wood. It's an easier pathway than going like against the grain, if you will. Well, I'm not really sure, but this little mushroom may be of the genus Inocebi, commonly called the fiber heads. They're mostly poisonous, largely containing muscarine, but other chemicals as well. And they're all mycorrhizal. They are usually more or less cone-shaped caps, can be narrower or broader. And they usually have a powdery quality to the upper part of the stalk if you look with the hand lens. And the gills are attached, but often finely so. And they often have strong smells. Many of the Inocebi species smell like human semen. This one is not very odoriferous, but you can check it out anyway. In the literature, you'll see some authors refer to that smell as spermatic. Others just saying unpleasant or disagreeable. It kind of depends on the times. Oh, yeah! This is a gorgeous mushroom. A bolete by general distinction. A bolete is a general term for any member of the family of boletes, the Boletaceae, which are the fleshy mushrooms that have a cap and a stalk with pores on the underside that are easily separable from the cap. So you can kind of peel the tubes away from the cap more or less, whereas with the fleshy polypores that grow on the ground, you cannot. This one is, I believe, to be Xerocomus chrysinteron, also called Boletus chrysinteron, the cracked cap bolete. And you can see that the cap is indeed highly cracked or areolate, like the areola of the human body. The area right around the nipple on the breast has a kind of cracked look to it. You can see tooth marks in the cap from a rodent. And you can see a blue staining on the somewhat large geometric yellow pores of this bolete, and you can see some blue staining on the yellow and red stalk. You can also see abundant white mycelial, cottony mycelium at the base of the mushroom. So this is a mycorrhizal mushroom, but I have a hunch that it's also doing a bit of decomposition of organic matter as well, because of the way it binds together the substrate there. Some mycorrhizal mushrooms do a little bit of decomposition as well. That mushroom is edible and regarded as mediocre at best. But it's a very common urban mushroom as well. It grows with a wide variety of tree species. I've had it fruiting prolifically in my garden, off of the roots of the street trees in the city. It's a cool mushroom. It's often quite beautiful and sometimes kind of ugly.
So Willoughby mentioned this genus earlier. This is a Cerium striatum.
Awesome.
Which has these striations or stripes kind of on the undersurface. So
Ooh,
you can see
that's
the
beautiful. If somebody would not mind carrying that back to the specimen table.
You could break off a piece.
Specimen table. Yeah, it's so beautiful the way the branches form though. So pass that around.
I want to grab. I have two as well here.
Yeah.
I have a coral. I also have a stematitis that's way past. So
this little black old slimy slime mold is the stematitis, and this gelatinous coral mushroom is sometimes called jelly antlers, and Calocera viscosa, is that right? Calocera could be viscosa. Yeah. There's a couple species. Some are larger, some are smaller, and have differentiating micro characters, but are otherwise kind of similar. And you can also see, if you flip the wood over, you can see some black lines. Those are the zone lines I was talking about, relating also to the black crustiness on the top, which is probably an ascomycete fungus. Yeah.
There, and then there's white on here.
Oh, yeah. So I just dropped this, which broke in my hands. This is the chestnut bolete again, Gyroporus castaneus, with its pale yellow pore surface, very spongy texture. And you'll see right here on the underside of the cap, there's a little bit of white mold growing. That is most likely another Hypomyces, Hypomyces chrysospermum, or Chrysospermus, I forget, but same. Also called the bolete eater, which unlike the lobster mushroom, which eats russulas and lactarius, does not improve the edible qualities of this mushroom, but diminishes not edible Hypomyces. Pass that around.
It's a jelly antler? Yeah, commonly.
Here's a little cutie guild mushroom. This is of a pleurotoid stature, but it's not a pleurotus. So oid means like or resembling. Pleurote refers to the genus Pleurotus, the oyster mushrooms. And that just means any mushroom that grows on wood that has a lateral or off-center attachment point and a small or absent stalk and gills. Can't tell you too much more about it. It may be a Crepidotus species, but I'm not going to quite say so.
And everything else is unknown. So if you go out with somebody on a fungi walk and people identify everything, you'll immediately know you're not with the...
You'll notice I'm often saying, this looks like it could be blah, blah, blah. You can cover your ass by saying things like that. This is cool. We don't know what it is, but it's got a viscid or slimy cap. The cap is convex with a small umbo, meaning the little nipple or bump in the middle of the cap. The margin of the cap is faintly striate, meaning you can see the gill ridges through the top of the cap. There's no veils. It's growing out of this very, very rotten wood that is thoroughly infused with this ascomycete, this pyrenomycete, flask fungus. Utapella perhaps. That's the crusty black bumps on the bottom that George Washington Carver was so enamored with. So pass that around. The lens is cool with that too. A pro tip, or actually super amateur tip, is you can take micro photos with the hand lens held up to your smartphone. Just line it up carefully and you can get really cool, small, up close photos. Oh. So, yeah. Check those out. Those mushrooms, I could guess maybe waxy cap, like hygrocebi, maybe gymnopolis, maybe something else altogether. Ooh, some nice rhizomorphs in here.
Want me to hold it? Oh yeah, that'd be great. I'm trying to figure out if
Icerias are the anamorphic gelato. Yeah, but some, I think that's Iceria. No, it had almost a dustiness, but I don't think so.
Let's keep moving. Here's some little fungi that look kind of like cotton balls that have been dipped in blue-dyed nail polish remover. Can't really speak to anything about their identification. They're cool. Like wow, these are gorgeous. Somebody's paying attention. So it's, it's about 1 p.m. That means it's, I guess, lunchtime. But if anybody wants to linger a little longer, I'm not rushing back super hard yet.